describe some challenges that educators are facing today in changing roles of education.
Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me on. And I would say that right now, student-led or student-centered collaborative learning is really the favorite trend in the highest-ranked educational systems in the world right now. But there are several barriers for American and especially Texan public educators that make it harder for that collaborative learning environment to be created. Not surprisingly, that first barrier is the STAR test. It is for worse, or more worse, because it's surely not better by any stretch, not based on any sort of collaborative learning. It's based on individualized learning, driving individualized results that are then aggregated together, with enough pressure applied to districts as to actually end up discouraging the use of collaborative learning in our schools. And what does that mean? It means that our teachers are literally flooded with data on all of their students with the idea and goal that somehow we can work with each one to get them to pass or get above that Mendoza line, if you'll allow me to use that baseball term. We are required to create student learning objectives and rate each student's level of mastery and progress throughout the year. And that's what our primary form of accountability is based on. Now, they're very careful to not actually say to only deal with the STAR testing, but they'll say that you can go beyond. But the only true and meaningful form of accountability is that test. And heaven help you if the expected percentage of your kids don't pass it. Now, the second obstacle is money. And after that amazing conversation that you, ID3, and Professor Willie and I had a couple weeks ago, I did some research and I found some pretty shocking stats. In 2018, of Texas's 254 counties, 213 of them had more than half of their student populations that were eligible for free or reduced lunch, based on federal guidelines. That's over 80% of the counties in Texas. So in more than 4 out of 5 Texas counties, over half of the students probably aren't able to afford the private tutoring after school or on weekends, where that collaborative learning is more likely to take place. And that means that those students who would benefit most from that collaborative learning, who are also much more likely to be rural students and much more likely to be at a higher risk factor academically, are much less likely to qualify for those early college, high schools, dual enrollment, and international baccalaureate programs and things like that. And that's a major problem. So one real way to solve it would be to find a way to deliberately structure the school day itself away from the STAR-driven data mania, to prioritize the collaborative learning that best practice indicates that our educators and students profit most from. So by doing this, we also steer away from some of the major drawbacks that some of those super education-focused countries run into. And that would be difficulties in creating well-rounded adults through a lack of extracurricular activities that help bring a broad array of life experiences that all the true leaders in our history always seem to have. And we just can't ever forget that play is itself collaborative learning, and it's a vital part of child development. So the other challenge is really getting people to realize that investing in education and those who are called to teach the future is not a waste of taxpayer money, whose employees are never to be trusted and suspiciously watched at every turn. And I understand that Texas was the birthplace of No Child Left Behind, but it can also be the birthplace to truly create the modern educational system that we need, right? And to do that, we need to invest in the training and support of not only our future crop of educators, but also our current teachers and administrators, because they will need training on creating and implementing new systems so that they can achieve that goal of collaborative learning. Early college, high school, dual enrollment, and IB teachers, as well as teachers in rural areas that are trained to teach these courses, also deserve the investment in being appropriately compensated for that extra work that they're taking on to give students in those schools the opportunities that their urban and suburban brethren already have because they're located by those community colleges. You know, that's only a partial list, but they're two of the big ones that we really need to think about and barriers that we need to overcome if we're going to really best service our students for the future. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke of the stool in which a proper public school educational system is supported with the parents, with the schools, and with the community, right? And what charter schools do and what private schools do is really attempt to kick one of the legs out from that stool. And that is the educator portion of this, right? And they hide all of that under that mantle of taxpayer accountability. And that is the system and the lens by which they focus their message, and they get people to distrust that educators are able to do the job. And that is why you see the curriculums that you see where everything is spelled out, and you see that lack of training that Dylan is speaking of. And I think that when you break that down, you, number one, have to show the data that shows that the charter schools are not holding up the bargain that they said they could hold up, because they're really not. There are a few charter schools that are functioning very well. There are a lot of charter schools that are functioning no better than public schools when you look at them. They might be better in math, but they're weaker in other areas, or they might be better in some other areas, but weaker in math. So understanding that data, and there is a huge amount of data now that clearly shows that, is part of that. So you're undermining the invincibility part that they're showing, whether they come in and, well, we can do this, right? Number three is taking that marketing that Delna was talking about and in getting people to understand that an investment in public schools is still the best way to go. We take all comers, right? As Delna pointed out, right? We do it all. We take them no matter what, and we do so, and we do miracles when we do so. And we get these kids ready to learn in spite of the barriers that get tossed in front of us. So getting people to understand that the investment in public schools is a worthwhile investment, and what they're getting for their money, as opposed to what they're not getting for their money with the charter schools and the for-profit schools. Remember, anytime you have something that is for-profit, the first thing that they are going to work to protect is their profit, because that is the reason for their existence. Public schools do not exist for financial profit. They exist for the profit of the growing of young minds and of our future. And that is truly the investment that pays off best in the long term. And getting people to understand that and realize that is really, I think, an important role in getting people to understand that, the privatization is not the panacea that they said it is. Public schools are the ones that still, in the end, are going to provide the education. They are the educational backbone of this country. They have been, and they will continue to be. I think that it really ties into, right, the moral question is tied into the long-term attack that has happened through private and charter schools that Delna alluded to. And I think that, and I'll paraphrase one of my favorite authors, David Weber, and is talking about his belief that the sentence, the end justifies the means, where suppression and repression become somehow acceptable if it's done in the name of a cause, or belief that reduces individuals to expendable pawns is the vilest of human poisons. And I think when you look at how charter schools have not only presented themselves, but have portrayed public education is a long-term burden that teachers have attempted to shoulder and carry. And it has only been in the last few years with the Red for Ed movement that public educators, who are by their natures accepting souls, as we said, we take all comers, and we shoulder burdens that most other folks would not be willing to take. We have tried to take that burden and say, well, we're going to do our jobs anyway. And finally, in the last few years, we have said, no, this is not right. Enough is enough. And I think for teachers to maintain that moral imperative that they have, that what they do, as Professor Willie said so aptly, makes a difference, right? We make a difference every day in the lives of our children. And anything that stands in our way of that should be confronted and dealt with. And I think even just having that respect that, this is my child's teacher, is important, and that provides that impetus for those teachers. I had a small child in the supermarket the other day who was with his mom, and I said, how you doing? And he's one of my students, and the student says, that's my music teacher. And he smiled, big smile, and it made me feel good, which brings me to the other part, and that is that teachers need to make sure that we manage self-care and self-awareness, making sure that we find ways to fill that emotional bucket, to remind ourselves of why we do what we do. For me, I got into teaching because I loved the feeling that I got when a child walked out of a room, even in high school when I was helping out my classmates. I loved that they got excited when they walked out of a room with a piece of knowledge they didn't have when they walked in, and I was able to give it to them. Right? So we need to make sure that we cherish and acknowledge and trumpet and celebrate those moments that we have with each other. And I think the final component of that, once you take care of making sure that your perception of, in the minds of the community remains unsullied, and making sure that you are filling that emotional bucket and keeping that emotional bank account from being overdrawn, is to make sure that you maintain your awareness of what the big picture is. We did what we did through Red for Ed here in Texas because we gained that awareness and we were willing to use it. And we must never let that go, or we will slide back. So it is important and an imperative for us, I think, for us to keep going, to keep educating the public and making sure that they understand that education is worth the investment.